Thank you so much. And welcome, folks. I think we have our opening words now.
Our opening words come from Psalm 98. O sing a new song to the Eternal. Shout praise, all earth, break into music and song. Praise the Eternal with lyre and song. Let the sea and all within it thunder praise. Let the world and its inhabitants. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the mountains sing in chorus. O sing a new song to the Eternal.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, folks. Welcome to another of our informal July services, once again on Zoom, but this time with a special guest, which I will get to. But it's good to be together. Welcome to all the First Parish folks and anyone else who's joining us here, near or far. So our service next Sunday will be led by Marge Heckman and Liz Connors, and they're doing a service on spiritual practices. And I think they sent out a note a while back asking for your all's contributions. So I'm hopeful that there will be a lot of wonderful contributions about spiritual practice that can be shared. And I believe they're planning for that to be an in-person worship and not a Zoom worship. I believe that is their hope and plan. So there will definitely be more information about that coming out, but just be thinking about that. And as I think folks know, but just to reiterate again, the building is open again and you can reserve space in it by contacting Brenda Rybicki, our new office administrator. So we've got a lot of meetings happening once again in the building, and some of the renters are starting to come back and find ways to use the building within our new guidelines. And so, you know, if you need to use space in the building, check that out. Make sure you check the guidelines as well. And know that the reopening task force is meeting again in August, and we'll be making more decisions about what the fall looks like. The plan that we have in place right now is our plan for the rest of the summer. There will be fall plans, so stay tuned to what that will look like. The other piece of new, everything's new. The other new thing I want to highlight again is that we do have some new church management software. It's called One Church. And you may be hearing about it. We're starting to roll it out slowly because we don't want to overwhelm people. We don't want to overwhelm the system. So sort of group by group, role by role, we're getting people added as users. and starting to explore some of the things this software can do, such as help you reserve rooms, have a calendar you can check, have easy ways to communicate with groups, and things like that. So stay tuned. Eventually, you too will be made a user and given the tools you need to use it effectively. And so don't worry if you hear about that happening. So with all of that, I just want to introduce our guest worship leader this morning, who I'm very pleased that I get to worship with because it's always a delight. Matt Meyer is a friend of mine and a lifelong UU, a musician and worship leader who has been leading worship all over the country. And since so many worship started happening on Zoom, I think sometimes he's been leading them in multiple time zones each Sunday, which I think is very impressive. He used to have to travel to lead worship, much easier on Zoom. But Matt lives in Boston. He's the director of operations for the Sanctuary Boston, which you may have heard of. It's a contemporary worship community based in Unitarian Universalism that has met in Boston and Cambridge when we met in person. And our coming of age class usually goes to check it out. It's a fabulous community full of great music. And Matt is also a founding organizer of the UU Song Leaders Convergence, a gathering for UUs who love community singing. And I will say I went to the first one and it was the best UU conference experience I've ever had. So highly recommend when those are able to happen again. And Matt also wrote a children's book that we're going to get to hear about called Desmond Gets Free, published by Skinner House Press. And I'm going to put some links into the chat so you can learn more about all the things I just told you. And I'm just really excited to hear the music and message that Matt's going to bring us this morning. So with that, I think it is time to do our unison affirmation. So please join me, though you are muted, in saying our unison affirmation this morning. And it will come up in a moment. Oops, skip some slides. Here we go. Unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Well, good morning. It's so good to be with you all today. Our opening song is Blessed Motion by Annie Zylstra. Annie wrote this song when she was inspired in part by the words of Martin Prechtel, who spoke of what it was like to have survived an earthquake in Guatemala. Prechtel spoke of what it was like to see the ground beneath his feet, that which had always been so permanent and so solid, suddenly rise up in motion. He said that the myth of believing in solid ground is a myth believed by those of us that live on the earth rather than live as a part of it. I know for that over a year now, I have been constantly searching for a sense of grounding in my own life, even as it feels like the ground beneath me is constantly shifting. So if that's true for you as well, I invite you into the spirit of this song, to be in motion with the earth and to be in movement together. There's a low part and a high part, and even though you're muted, I invite you to still sing along at home. Just because we can't hear each other doesn't mean we can't sing together in some way at least. It goes like this. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion. In the winds of steady change and the ever-rolling ocean, all moves on in perfect motion. All is change and ever rolling ocean, all moves on We'll do that little part 2 more times.
Perfect motion, all is change and never rolling ocean, all moves on in perfect motion, all is change and never rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change and the ever rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change and the ever rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change and the ever rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change and the ever rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change and the ever rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion.
Well, I'd love to share this story with you all, called Desmond Gets Free. As Annie said, it was just published just a couple months ago by Skinner House Press at the UA, and it's been a joy to get to share it with folks. Now, Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond would wake with the sunrise and spend the day playing in the meadow, and every evening he would go to sleep under the beautiful starry sky. One night, though, Desmond awoke to find that it was still dark out. He tried to roll over, get more comfortable, and go back to sleep, but something wasn't right. Desmond could hardly move, and his tail was throbbing with pain. Reaching behind him, he felt that there was, must have been some sort of huge boulder that had landed on his tail in the middle of the meadow. It was stuck and he could hardly move. He tried pushing on this boulder to get free, and he tried as hard as he could tugging on his tail to get loose. And he tried pushing on the boulder and tugging on his tail and pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing, but it was no use. He was stuck. When Desmond was just about out of breath, he saw a giraffe pass by. Good news, he thought. He called out, "Oh, giraffe, it seems that some kind of boulder has landed just on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could use your powerful legs to just nudge it a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." "I don't know about that," said the giraffe. "You know what they, first of all," the giraffe chuckled a little bit to himself, He said, "That is no boulder that's fallen on your tail. That is an elephant that's fallen asleep on your tail, you silly mouse." Well, that's good news, thought Desmond. In that case, if you could just gently wake the elephant and ask him to just roll over a few inches in the other direction, I could get free. Well, you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie, the giraffe said. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this. Well, the giraffe wandered off just as Desmond whispered to himself, I do not appreciate your neutrality. The little Desmond tried shouting to wake up the elephant. With all of his voice, he yelled out, but his little mouse voice was just too far from those giant elephant ears at the other end of that giant elephant body. Again, he tried pushing on the elephant with all of his strength and tugging on his tail with all of his might. And he tried shouting and tugging and pushing and pushing and tugging and shouting, but it was no use. He was stuck. And when he had just about given up, he saw another animal pass by through the meadow, a gazelle. He called out, "Oh, gazelle, it seems that some elephant has fallen asleep on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could gently wake him up and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." "I don't know about that," said the gazelle. "I mean, surely you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like these." Well, Desmond said, "I do not appreciate your neutrality." The gazelle wandered off, leaving Desmond alone again. Again, he tried shouting to wake the elephant. He tried pushing with all of his strength and tugging with all of his might. And he tried shouting and pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing and shouting over and over again until he had just about given up for the last time when he saw another animal pass by through the grass. It was a mouse this time, and he called out. The mouse ran over and introduced himself. "My name's Nelson. What seems to be the problem?" No sooner had Desmond explained the situation than Nelson ran as fast as he could all the way to the other side of that giant elephant body. And he called up to those giant elephant ears, "Excuse me. It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could roll over just a few inches in the other direction, he could go free." Well, the elephant heard little Nelson's voice down on the ground, but those giant elephant ears were still too far away on top of that giant elephant head, and the elephant was also just a little too comfortable. He didn't budge. So Nelson ran back to Desmond and said, "I think I might have an idea. Stay right here." And he ran off into the grasses, leaving a confused look on Desmond's face. And just as Desmond was starting to get worried again, Nelson emerged through the grass, but he wasn't alone this time. He had found 3 mouse friends, and each of them had found another 3 mouse friends. And the whole group of them ran to the other side of that giant elephant body, and one mouse climbed up on the shoulders of another, and another slowly, carefully climbed up on their shoulders, and one by one till they had a whole mouse ladder all the way up the back of that giant elephant head. And at last, Nelson climbed up the shoulders of his friends, and he stood right at the opening of that giant elephant ear. And he shouted with all of his voice, "Excuse me. It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. Roll over just a few inches so he can get free." Well, Nelson's voice was just too loud to ignore this time. And so the elephant rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. The mice climbed back down to the ground, and they met up with Desmond, and the whole group of them spent the rest of that day playing in the middle of the meadow together. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have already taken sides with the powerful and with the oppressor. He's said, if an elephant is standing on the tail of a mouse, the mouse will never appreciate your neutrality. As Unitarian Universalists, we've imagined a world of justice and equity and compassion, and so we take sides for those things. We take sides for justice. We gather together to take action and take sides for equity and for compassion. It means that we work together in community to side with love. May it be so, and may we make it so.
Thank you for that beautiful story. Well, we definitely do need each other, whether we're stuck under an elephant or something else has befallen us. We need each other in this community, both in sorrow and struggle and in joy and celebration.
Our reading comes from a few different authors this morning. Words by Adrienne Marie Brown, a writer in residence at the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute. She says, we have to practice. Understand that every single thing we do is practice. Envision the new story and practice it into existence. And words from Greg Epstein, a humanist chaplain. He says, it has been the movement's own tendency to focus on religious beliefs, when the key to understanding religions lies not in beliefs at all, but in practice, in what people do and not just what they think. And finally, words from Beth Strano, who says, there's no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. This space seeks to turn down the volume of the outside world and amplify the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be ours together, and we will work on it side by side.
This is a time when we encourage the generosity that sustains this community and invite you to contribute to the thriving of this community. You've seen this slide a lot of times, you've heard this a lot of times, but we do encourage you to give. You can do the online donation, the smartphone donation, or the good old-fashioned checks. Or maybe like me, you have your monthly giving already set up and you don't have to do anything. You can just sit back and enjoy our offertory music, which is another great way to do it. Your generosity is deeply appreciated.
Let the life I lead speak for me. Let the life I lead speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lead speak for me. Let the life I lead speak for me. Let the life I lead speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lead speak for me. Let the friends I have, let the friends I have speak for me. Let the friends I have speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, Let the friends I have speak for me. Let the work I do, let the work I do speak for me. Let the work I do speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the work I do speak for me. Let the love I share, let the love I share speak for me. Let the love I share speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the love I share speak for me. And let the songs I sing, let the songs I sing speak for me. Let the songs I sing speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the songs I sing speak for me. And let the life I lead, let the life I lead speak for me. Let the life I lead speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lead speak for me.
Well, I start just about every morning with a to-do list. Usually, between you and me, it is an overly ambitious to-do list, scribbled on a post-it note in the corner of my desk. One of the things that often remains unchecked at the end of the day is making time for writing. It's not that it's not important to me. I'm so dedicated to being a writer that every day I put it on my to-do list, and every day I collect readings and quotes and prompts and story ideas so that when I do write, I'll have lots of inspiration for it. I'm so dedicated that every day I finish other pressing commitments and I work on other important things so that I'll eventually have lots of time to write. And I'm so dedicated that surely one of these days I'll start writing. One of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, talks about this, about how hard it is, in fact, to just sit down every day and put your butt in the chair and write. She says, "The discouraging voices will hound you. This is all piffle, they will say, and they might be right. What you are doing may just be practice, but this is how you're going to get better." Some of the best writing advice I ever got was very similar. It was from a teacher who told me, take a few minutes and don't write, but just write what you would write if you were going to write. I sometimes feel like I haven't written anything in all the years since I got that advice, but I have written a lot about what I would write if I did write. You might call this the practice of practicing, learning how to practice. The problem is that the finished product we might imagine for ourselves can feel too far from where we're starting. Similarly, the person we would like ourselves to be can so often feel too far from the person we see in the mirror every day. And we know certainly that the world as we would like it to be can so often feel impossibly far from what we read in the headlines. The demons of perfectionism stand in the way of writing just as they stand in the way of creative risk-taking in general. Which is unfortunate because we know that creating a life for yourself that doesn't yet exist requires some creative risk-taking. Certainly in anxious and uncertain times like these, Just showing up as your best self every day requires setting aside those discouraging voices that hound us. And so often, just even imagining a world of true justice and equity and compassion can mean setting aside those voices that say your efforts are just piffle. When the demons of perfectionism show up like this, I try to practice the practicing of showing up for myself and for others. Musicians know something about practicing. One of the requirements for all students at Berklee College of Music, where I attended here in Boston years ago, was 4 semesters of ear training. Ear training is learning to sight sing music just by reading the notes on the page, and learning to write down the notes just by listening to a song. Now, when I began school, I knew that there were people who were capable of this kind of magic, but it seemed like some kind of Harry Potter nonsense to me. Like, you may as well ask me to walk into the classroom and turn my desk into a toad using a conductor's baton. I remember the first day of ear training class, there was a sort of nervous silence among us new students. Well, silence except for one student who was quite vocal in his nervousness. This one student interrupted the teacher in the first few minutes of the very first day to share that he was worried that the class was going to be too advanced for him. He wanted to make it clear that he didn't know a single thing about ear training. The teacher very kindly paused his introductions to respond. He explained that we had all taken entrance exams and he was sure we'd been placed in the appropriate class. The teacher tried to continue but was interrupted again. Well, the man said, "Is this the very lowest class? Because I need to be in like the very lowest class." Now, our poor teacher looked around the room a little embarrassed at this point, not really wanting to answer that yes, we were a class of the very most basic students. Well, he said, it is ear training 101, so it is the lowest, I guess. He said, there is, I think, a class for people that have previously failed the 101, but you all are just about the lowest. Now, some of the other students giggled a little bit at this man's anxieties as he questioned the class and whether he was going to be able to figure it out. But I was actually kind of glad to hear that someone was questioning what felt to me like the absurd notion that sight singing even could be taught. I don't know what happened next for that student, but I know that he never came back to our class. Not because anything we did on the first day was in fact too hard for him, I'm sure of that, but I think he lacked a belief that improvement was even possible. I kept going, thinking that if other students have done this before me, generations of students, in fact, it must be possible somehow, even if I personally can't see the way forward. I made a commitment to at least practice the material, though. I've always remembered this other student, though, the student who gave up before he'd started. It's not just that he didn't try to become a great master at ear training. It's that he didn't even try the practicing of it, which always struck me as the real loss. When the discouraging voices hound me, I sometimes think of him, and I remind myself that maybe for now the work I'm doing is just practice, but practice is how I'm going to get better. This pandemic has arrived nearly a year and a half ago now, and it has been a difficult time, to be sure, a time of the ground shifting beneath us constantly. I imagine that the next year, much like the last one, will be a time of relearning new ways of being together, of organizing our days differently all over again, a time of organizing our people differently all over again. Times of adaptation such as these are also times of imagination, times to remember that we don't have to go back to the way things were exactly, times to imagine new ways of being together. In particular, I think this is the time calling on those in power, which in some ways is all of us, to play a different role and to learn some new tunes. And particularly for white folks, this is a time to practice some new ways of being in our communities. A time for listening in deeper ways we haven't always done so well before, and having some hard conversations we just haven't practiced enough. Fellow white folks, as we reimagine society, as we restructure our days and our lives, let's listen to the voices that are fighting to be heard elsewhere and amplify those voices. If you inherited wealth that was accumulated in a time of segregation, which is true of all wealth in this country, let's practice giving it away. When we hear people of color making demands, let's practice amplifying those voices by repeating them in calls to our representatives and colleagues and family. If your muscle memory has been to call the police when something goes wrong, let's get together and find a different way to do it and practice something new. I won't all of a sudden do all of these, but I will practice the doing of them. Musicians know as well as anyone that muscle memory is very real. We know that consistent practicing changes the very structure of our brains, rewiring our circuitry, forging new connections and new possibilities. No one is born a musician. Musicians are just the ones that learned how to practice. Even songbirds need elder birds to sing to them and teach them their tunes. Practice doesn't make music perfect. It makes music possible. So let us practice the practicing together. Let's practice showing up for ourselves and for each other to build that new world of justice and equity and compassion. Practice won't make the world perfect, but it makes a better world possible. Someday I want to be a true expert in justice and compassion. Someday I want to be an expert at amplifying the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. Someday I want to be part of transforming our so-called justice system that has hurt so many so deeply. Someday I want to be part of transforming an education system that fast-tracks some to college and others to prison. And I want to be part of changing an energy sector that's been working overtime to overheat our planet. These are daunting tasks, to be sure. On most days, learning to transcribe a symphony seems more manageable than any one of them. But that's okay, because for now, I don't have to do all of those things. I just need to practice doing what I would do if I were doing them. So dear ones, don't promise to be your best self today. Just be the person you would be if you were practicing being your best self. Don't try to rebuild a new world in the image of love this week. Just practice doing what you would do if you had committed to such things. May we practice together, working side by side. Our closing song is More Waters Rising by Sarah Lynch Thomason. She's a climate justice activist in Appalachia. And this song, like the best music, I would say, and perhaps like the best faith communities, calls us not to ignore the hard things, not to ignore the crises of our time, but to face them directly, to name them honestly, and to move forward to address them together. I invite you to sing along at home as you get a sense of the music. Let's see if we can get the drum in the picture here.
There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. Alright, now that you got it, let's try that verse again and then sing along. Here we go. There are more waters rising, this I know, this this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. More fires burning, there are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more fires burning, they will find their way to me. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. More mountains falling, there are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. There are more mountains falling, they will find their way to me. There are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will walk through the fire, I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fires, this I know. I will walk through the fires when they find their way to me. I will walk through the fires, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fires, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains when they find their way to me. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. There are more waters rising, there are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know.
Dear ones, don't promise to be your best self today. Just practice being the person you would be if you were being your best self. Don't try to rebuild a new world in the image of love this week. Just practice doing what you would do if you had committed to such beautiful things. May we practice together, side by side. Go in peace, go in love, and go and be blessed as you are a blessing to others.
you so much, Matt, for the music and the story and the message. I love those songs, and I was having a very nice time singing along on mute over here. I hope other people were as well. So I'm gonna take us off of worship mode so that you can unmute yourself if anyone wants to have a question or a comment for a few minutes, and then we can see if we want to go into some breakout rooms to socialize. Gosh, it's been a while since I've used these Zoom settings. Kind of like remind myself how to take us all off mute. Here we go. Thank you for coming this morning and joining in some music and some thinking about practicing. Something I'm always reminding myself. I really like that framing. Don't do it, just do what you would do if you were gonna do it. That's a good one. All right, well, have a great rest of your Sunday, everyone. And I won't be there next week. I'll be on vacation, but there will be spiritual practices from Marge and Liz, and it will be beautiful, I'm sure. So hope you'll all be there. Bye, everybody.
Have a good day, all. Be well.